Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to talk about financial oversight. So as a review, remember we said that as a board, you're operating as being informed by these three duties, right? You are appointing an executive director, your strategic planning, you're ensuring compliance, and you are overseeing the financial responsibility of the organization, okay? So we talked about the executive director in one video, and now we're going to talk a bit about the financial oversight. So finances is kind of part of compliance. A lot of the financial oversight is part of compliance. Another big chunk of it is part of just the duty of care as far as the responsibility for the organization to be operating in a fiscally responsible way, to not be running out of money, all of that kind of thing. So the major things that you have to take care of as a board, and a lot of this will probably be done by the treasurer or the treasurer with a finance committee, is approving the annual budget and making sure that there's financial practices in place for transparency and accountability, okay? Now, like I talked about in the executive director video, the annual budget, the goal of that is to proactively look at the upcoming year and have a plan, right? It's probably going to be part of a strategic plan, but it's also just part of your overall strategic plan of being fiscally responsible. So you're making sure that you know where your revenue is coming from, that it's realistic. You're making sure you know what your operational costs are. You're making sure everybody is adequately cared for, making sure your staff is being cared for, making sure your insurances are being paid, and there's money for that, right? Like all the things that need to happen to keep you compliant, and all of that is, it's going to be wrapped up in budget. And so that's what you're going to be approving. Now, in reality, especially in a larger organization, your staff is probably going to be the ones with the actual knowledge of what needs to happen. Oh, we didn't have a budget for this thing, teacher training or something like that, and we really could use it. So they're going to be informing whoever is creating that budget. The budget, ultimately it should be going through the executive director because they're responsible for, all of that. And they should be the one who understands who the supervisors are, who the staffing is, what's needed, if there's any gaps, all of that. And then being able to decide, we have this big gap over here, so where can we find the resources to fill that gap? How are we going to pay that person? Or where we have a skill set that we just nobody really knows how to do this. We need to go find someone to do it so that it's getting done well. The executive director is overseeing that. They should be the ones who understand that through, just working with people, having meetings, overseeing the operations. So ultimately, they're the ones who are probably going to be pulling together the entire budget. It could also be, in a larger organization, it may be an administrative director or a finance director who might answer to the executive director or possibly to the board or whatever, but they're going to have to be responsible and be aware of all of the different parts of the entire organization in order to build out the budget, okay? So the board's job is to be able to ask the right questions and be able to look at it and know what they're looking at, make sure that all the compliance and legal stuff is taken care of, make sure that it's fiscally responsible as far as, the projected revenue shouldn't be vastly underneath the projected expenses, and there's no plan for how to get the money. When we talk about strategic planning, some of this might go into that. You might need to feed this information into a larger strategic plan and say, well, we have no way to fill this gap, so we need to have a campaign or whatever, and that might be part of a strategic plan, which then is well, who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? How long is it actually going to take? All of that would go into a strategic plan. But for this is one of the pieces of information that might go into that. But right now, you're asking the right questions, especially about legal compliance stuff, okay? And then you will put that to a vote and approve the planning budget. It doesn't mean that, it's all set in stone. It's just the planning budget. And then it should get checked in with to see how it's going, if everything's going as planned. Now, the other really important thing is we can look at this form, which there's some other sections in this form that I'd like to show you in the compliance video, but right now we're just going to look at the financial practices So as you can see here, and this is from Lawyers for Nonprofits. I just got this online. You can print this out and find it. This is some of the things, the financial practices that the board should make sure are in place. Okay. So the board of directors should be approving the annual budget, like I just talked about. And then there's some other things that are like accountability, transparency things. Okay. So some of the major ones here are the person who's writing and signing checks shouldn't be the same person who's reviewing all the bank statements. Okay. So usually it's an operational person, like they might have to write checks for just daily operations or whatever. And that should be like practical. It should be someone who's able to do that. It shouldn't be a burden. Like they can't write checks for more than $100 without 2 signatures, maybe $2,000, but like it should be a realistic number so the person can do the job they need to do. Because sometimes a nonprofit will like to have like larger checks or larger bills be approved by a second person. That can just be another transparency practice. But like the bank statements, they might need to be sent to like the treasurer. They should be sent to a second set of eyes, okay? A similar thing is the reconciliation, which is part of the bookkeeping. That should be not the same person who's signing checks because, it's for transparency. Like we're not accusing anybody of doing anything dishonest, but you don't want the person who's reconciling and the person who's signing the checks to be the same person, okay? So let's say that the treasurer is getting statements every month and just flipping through them and looking for anything. And a bookkeeper is actually reconciling the statements while they're categorizing the books. And those two people are not the same person who actually has authority to sign checks. That would be a good practice, okay? You might also have like the bookkeeper might actually like pay some of the bills. Like they can, like QuickBooks can like issue checks or whatever where they like, there's different ways to do bookkeeping. They might just be categorizing, or they might actually be like printing out checks that then have to go get signed by somebody else. So the person who's writing the check and the person who's signing the check are the same thing. Now, you can discuss with your finance committee, with your board, what's practical for you. Not for you because you're not the ones doing it, but partly for you, but also just for your operational staff. Like I said, you don't want to make it burdensome and difficult for them to carry on their operations, but you do want just responsibility and accountability, okay? It might be something up here, the blank checks are under lock out of public view. Don't leave them in the lobby or whatever. Does everybody know where the blank checks are kept? Are they locked up? Just making sure that, that things are secure. You could have a person opening the mail. Again, it depends on where the mail's going and, who's actually having to look at all of this, but maybe opening the mail and making a list of anything that's coming in, any revenue that's coming in before it goes to the bookkeeper. Okay. So this might just be a practical, like the person who's, making sure that maybe it's the person who's doing admissions and making sure that the tuition is being paid, like they're seeing the payments and all of that, isn't the same person who's also keeping the books, okay? Like at one point I was doing the enrollment and the admissions part. I was doing all the billing agreements and I was seeing the billing agreements, whether they were getting paid or not. I was also doing the bookkeeping for a while, which I shouldn't have been doing both of those things. So a bookkeeper would see those tuition payments coming in through the accounting software, like through the bookkeeping software, where I was seeing them coming through the enrollment software, okay? So there's like 2 sets of eyes on it. And that way, if there's any discrepancies, it's caught in 2 different places. Now, auditing is something that's like, a formal audit is like an expensive, big deal. It's usually not necessary when you're smaller, but an internal audit is not a bad idea as far as like, you might have a finance committee do it, or you could even create an audit committee where maybe once or twice a year, or maybe if you don't want to have to go through a whole pile of stuff, you might do this every month or every 2 or 3 months, where they are literally physically looking through like the checkbook and the bank statements and are just looking through and making sure that everything looks reasonable, everything's kind of balancing out, okay? And that should be done kind of on a regular basis and making sure that it's just there's transparency and the board knows what's going on, okay? And then a retention policy, as far as like you probably want to approve some sort of policy for your records. And this can go for all sorts of records, but specifically for like bank statements and things like that, just write a policy. Like, how long do you hold on to things? Where are they? Remember, you're going to have other board members coming in and you might not be here anymore. You might move away or just be gone. And those upcoming board members should know where to find things. It should know that things are being kept and it's not just all over the place or being kept in somebody's house or whatever. Okay. And again, the secretary probably should be keeping the most important records, a copy of those. But that might be like balance statements. But it could be monthly bank statements, and copies of those things might be going to the secretary or to the treasurer and then filed by the secretary. Okay. So those are just some like good financial practices to put in place proactively. If you ever do have a formal audit, which some like larger grant organizations want to see a formal audit, like 3 years of good financial records, it's important to have these things in place because they don't want to give a grant to somebody whose books are a mess or whose finances are just, you can't see what happened. Okay, so one more thing I just want to say was that bookkeeping in a nonprofit is a whole thing that's different than bookkeeping in a private organization. There's different language, especially if there's a lot of fundraising or grants and donations. There's just a whole type of language and bookkeeping language that goes into that, and it's really important to make sure that it's being kept properly. Okay, so part of what you need to know as a board is that your nonprofit bookkeeping is being done in a nonprofit way. Again, it's kind of operational to actually go find the person, and your executive director, who is probably sitting in your board meeting, might be the person who says, okay, well, now I know I need to make sure I have a nonprofit specialist to do my bookkeeping. I have to go find an accounting firm who can do it this way. It's going to cost this much. I'm going to go do the research and find out, and it's going to be this much in the budget and, whatever. If nothing else, at least make sure the books are being kept and being categorized. If you go to TechSoup, which is a website, if you have 501c3 status, you might not be able to do this till you actually get your 501c3 status. You can become like a member of TechSoup, and they have a lot of deals for nonprofits. And like at one point I was able to get QuickBooks for an entire year for like a really good price. And there's also a training course called QuickBooks for Nonprofit that I actually took. And it was because I was doing bookkeeping. I didn't really understand all of the nonprofit language. I just kind of like had to keep the books in order and categorize things so that I could budget. But it kind of grew, and then I realized, this is a whole thing. I need to learn about this. And it was like a 5-hour video course. I got it like super cheap on this. It was really useful, and it really like demystified a lot of the nonprofit bookkeeping. Did not make me an accountant or a professional by any means, but at least it allowed me to like categorize things and understand some of the basic terminology. I'd recommend that even if you have a nonprofit bookkeeper, because at least then you understand the language and you understand what they're talking about. You being probably the treasurer, all the board members don't need to take a 5-hour course on bookkeeping at all. But the treasurer might want to actually, especially if they don't understand accounting. And then whoever on your staff, like maybe your executive director or your administrative director, is overseeing the bookkeeping, they should also, understand the basics of nonprofit language. Okay. There's also Foundation Group has a pretty good reputation for doing bookkeeping and nonprofit paperwork. They're not super cheap, but if you budget it in from the beginning and say, well, I don't want to think about it, I just want to get somebody who knows what they're doing to do this, they might be somebody to look at. Okay. So approving the annual budget, making sure your financial transparency approving the annual budget, making sure the transparency systems and procedures are in place and accountability systems and procedures are in place. And then, just reviewing on a regular basis all your finances and possibly having a finance committee who helps oversee some of the smaller financial decisions if that is necessary. A lot of it will be operational to actually do, but this is what the board is responsible for. Okay, and we'll talk more about compliance in a different class.